welcome back to the O'Day and Night podcast. I'm your host, Adam O'Day, alongside the college football encyclopedia yet again, Connor Hibbett. Connor, how you doing today?
I'm doing terrific, and my day gets better every single time that I'm on the podcast. So,
Love
thank
to
you
see
for
it.
having me on.
Love to see it. Glad you're here. So, last episode we discussed a few breakout players each of us had, and now we've got a few breakout or surprise teams to cover for the 2024 season. So I'll let you go ahead and start your list off.
Well, so some of the quarterbacks that I was talking about in that previous episode are going to be on the teams, or at least some of the teams that I'm going to be discussing on this episode. Let's start with Virginia Tech. This is a team that played really well down the stretch last year, found their quarterback in Kyron Drones. They returned their most production in the country. Out of all FBS teams, that's 134 FBS teams, they're number one in returning production according to Bill Connolly's numbers. I've been reading Bill Connolly's returning production figures and stats for 7-8 years now.
Wow. Shout out to my main man, William, or Bill, as the communists say.
So Virginia Tech, they've kind of fallen off the map here these last few years. It's been since 2017 since they've had one of those. They used to be a double-digit win team almost every single year under that previous coaching staff. Frank Beamer was there for years, and he's a legend there. The coach that took over for him, Fuente, lasted just for a few years, but he had a couple good teams that were holdovers, from Beamer's recruiting classes, and so that was before the transfer portal era. So players didn't enter the transfer portal. We didn't have college football free agency back then, so they didn't just enter the portal whenever a coach left. So he retained some of those players. They had a couple good years, and then Fuente just didn't do a very good job in Blacksburg, Virginia. So Virginia Tech consequently kind of fell off the map, and I think they could have their best season this year since 2017. Wow. Again, they return all their players, but it's not just the returning production. They've got studs. Here's another little nugget for you. Virginia Tech is one of only 8 Power 4 now. I got to get used to saying Power 4. They're one of only 8 Power 4 teams who did not have a single player partake in the NFL Combine or pro days.
Oh, wow.
So all the players that could have decided to leave and go early to the NFL draft, they elected to come back. Wow. So they're kind of having that run it back mentality. So again, they return all that production, but on top of that, they return, I think, in my opinion, maybe 6 guys who I think could be drafted in 2025. I really like their receiving core. They've got a star-studded secondary. Their defensive line has one of the better pass rushers in the ACC. They've picked up a couple really good interior defensive linemen in the transfer portal. I think this team has the total package. And again, Kyron Drones at quarterback. They've got a really good running back. They got good special teams, and the schedule is very manageable. Last year, Virginia Tech, so they finished the season well. They beat Tulane by 3 touchdowns in the bowl game.
Which kind of surprised me because of all the hype Tulane was getting.
Yeah, well, the thing is, Tulane had a lot of opt-outs in that bowl game, so it kind of felt like they had a no-show. But Virginia Tech really cared about that bowl game. So this is a team that ended the season playing very well. The reason why you didn't really hear much about Virginia Tech last year was kind of the timing of their losses. Right. They had 3 early season losses before they had really figured out that Drones was their guy at quarterback, and then they had 3. Then they had 3 losses kind of down the stretch. A couple of them were in close games, but they also faced some of the best teams in the ACC last year. They faced both Florida State and Louisville, who obviously ended up playing for the ACC championship. Neither Florida State or Louisville is on Virginia Tech's schedule this year, and they also avoid North Carolina. And they get Clemson at home. And the rest of their ACC schedule, the second most difficult game is probably at Miami. Wow. So I think the Hokies, they could be one of the biggest breakthrough stories this season. And I think there's an outside chance that they could actually play, if not maybe win, the ACC championship. And remember, we have the expanded college football playoff this year. So don't be surprised if Virginia Tech is in at least the running for
Right.
one of those 12 spots.
Oh, yeah. And I'm sure if y'all follow CFE Grind on Instagram, he's going to be posting a lot this fall about Virginia Tech.
Yeah, I might lose my Virginia Tech idea this year. So who's one of your breakthrough teams?
Yeah, so my first breakthrough team, I mean, we talked about him a little bit yesterday, or last episode. Texas State they went 8-5 last year, which they doubled their win total. One of your breakout players, Jordan McLeod, accounted for over 3,900 total yards, so passing plus rushing, and 43 total touchdowns. And their head coach, G.J. Kinney, he's a stud.
He is.
He's a stud. They averaged 15.6 more points a game in 2023 than they did in 2022.
Yep.
And they're not just an offensive team. They led the entire nation in tackles for loss.
Yeah, they are aggressive on defense. They do give up big plays, but they're kind of all or nothing. But yeah, with that offense of theirs, their defense can kind of be high variance like that and kind of go all for broke, if you will.
Oh, yeah. And I'm sure they're at least going to be in the running for 10 wins this year.
Yeah. So. And something else to keep in mind, last year the Sun Belt it was a top-heavy conference.
Right.
They had really good teams in James Madison, Troy, Appalachian State, per normal. And then South Alabama was better than their record. They were really a pretty good team. Not App State, but the rest of the top of the Sun Belt from last year, Troy, James Madison, and South Alabama are all in the triple digits in returning production.
Wow.
And on top of that, they lose their coaching staffs, their head coaches, and a lot of their other coordinators. And so when you look at the entire picture of the Sun Belt last year, that kind of makes you wonder if, the best of the rest teams from 2023, as long as they return quite a bit, and as we've discussed with Texas State, they do, and obviously they pick up Jordan McLeod in the portal to go along with their returning production, it makes you wonder, it makes you think, the best of the rest teams from 2023, maybe they could be the best teams in 2024 because we're probably going to see some change at the top of the Sun Belt this year. So I'm right there with you with Texas State this year.
Oh, yeah, so I guess they are your second breakout team?
Yeah, you could say I've got four, and so now we've discussed two of them. So why don't you go, I guess, with your second breakthrough team?
Yeah, my second and I guess final breakout team was the Army Black Knights. Now, they're playing their first season in the AAC, and they've got a pretty favorable schedule. They open up the year with Lehigh at home, who, I've never heard of Lehigh, but they're probably not very good. Then they travel to Florida to take on FAU, play Rice at home. And then Game 4, they play at Temple, which, keep in mind, this is at the Philadelphia Eagles Stadium, where, at least for the last 10 to 12 years, this has been the host of the Army-Navy game. So Army's been able to, win a lot of games there.
And it's a good thing they're not playing Lehigh in basketball. Because remember, Lehigh beat Duke.
That's right.
Of course, that's already a decade ago. Time flies. I'm getting old now. What the heck?
Yeah. And then they also play Tulsa at UNT, which, we've talked.
Take the over.
Oh, definitely.
As long as they don't hog the clock on us, which they might do, actually.
Right. But, UNT, we've talked about them a decent amount on this podcast. The worst defense in all of college football last year.
And specifically the run defense.
Yes. You're not going to win very many games against anybody with four guys in the box.
Yep.
And especially against the flex boners in Army. I really said that on my podcast.
Hey, sometimes, this podcast goes hard. What can we say?
No cap.
No cap. Oh, I'm not. No, I'll let you take part in that this time around. It'll take an Army to stop the Black Knights.
Oh, definitely.
So
they're returning to their starting QB from a year ago, Bryson Daly. We talked a lot about dual threat quarterbacks in college football. This guy is a true dual threat. 913 pass yards and 7 touchdowns, 901 rush yards and 7 touchdowns in 2023. So, literally a dual threat.
Yeah, there you go. So college football, we gotta have all the conference realignment this year, and there are some teams who I think fare better than others in terms of like their strength of schedules within their own conferences. So like some teams will get like a luck of the draw in terms of, okay, well this year they got the weaker teams in conference because of all the wackiness with the conference realignment. Other teams are like, oh my gosh, our schedule is like gauntlet. We got all the good teams.
Right. And you look at like the Big Ten now, who it's just loaded.
Yeah. And
quantity and quality.
There you go. Yeah. And like an incoming Big Ten team from the Pac-12 and UCLA, I think there's a pretty good chance UCLA will finish with a losing record this year. They had some good pieces on their team last year, especially defensively, mostly their pass rush. And in fact, the Murphy twins, who we are very familiar with here in Denton.
Yeah, I still hate him for leaving.
That's the day and age we're in. In fact, just before we started this podcast, arguably our best basketball player for the Mean Green is entering the transfer portal.
Yeah, Jason Edwards spent a year here, and honestly, he's not even that good, at least not for the upper echelon of college basketball teams.
Yeah, we're just in an era where it's all about marketing and money, and so if I were in these players' shoes, I would be looking to do the same thing in terms of trying to find the best brand and trying to market my name, and if you can, pick up the bag. You're a college student. I mean, for a lot of these guys, they're not wealthy to start with for most of these guys, and so I understand from their perspective. It's just we probably do need more regulation though, because it is free agency in college sports right now, which is not what NIL was intended to be.
Right.
We could have a whole other podcast about this, honestly.
Oh, definitely. Like, I just view NIL, like, what it's supposed to be, I guess, as, like, be in a video game, sell jerseys, that type of stuff.
Exactly. One of the very first big-time deals was, NIL began almost 3 years ago, July 1st, 2021, with the new fiscal year.
Put my girl Livy Dunn on Times Square.
There you go. That one was like the really first well-known. But in college football, the first like big one in terms of like unique branding, like with the name, was Bo Nix. He did that thing with Bojangles.
Yes.
That is exactly what NIL was intended to be, not with tampering. But you know what human nature is? And I mean every single human being would do that. If you have zero rules or regulations with something, you're going to push the limit to see what you can get away with, right?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And then you looked at Dabo Swinney, who, on the record, I said he doesn't really care for NIL.
Right. And so, it's just we're in changing times right now. And so speaking of those changing times, we got that conference realignment. And so some teams are better off than other teams. And so last year, I posted this on CFB last year on my college football Instagram page. I talked about how, remember the former American Athletic Conference had teams like Cincinnati, UCF, and Houston. It was top heavy, right? And those were some of the better football teams, over the last few years. And they left to go to the Big 12. And so it sparked an idea in me that, well, what does that mean for the teams who were always like best of the rest, right? Like tier 2 teams in the past. Doesn't that make them the new tier 1? And guess what we saw? SMU and Memphis both had breakthrough seasons. SMU won the conference.
And now they're leaving.
Yeah, and now they're leaving, right? So, and then looky now, we have Memphis, who is getting probably the most hype to be the potential G5 representative in the expanded college football playoff this fall.
Yeah, and keep in mind, UNT, with how bad their defense was, almost won.
Yeah, I mean, we came back, we fought hard. Our post-game win expectancy, though, still would have been low because we really never stopped Memphis. Remember, that receiver on that 4th and 5, he dropped it. Yeah. He's wide open. We never stopped them. Memphis just shot themselves in the foot. I think they got a little conservative, too. Obviously, our offense was great, so they're going to keep scoring. So in order to stay ahead on the scoreboard, your offense is going to have to stay aggressive, and Memphis did not. So they almost shot themselves in the foot. But
yeah, I remember that weekend very well. So my younger brother, he's a Division II college football player, had a game up in Durant, Oklahoma, which is pretty close. But I remember checking the store at halftime. It was kind of a blowout.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, no, we're screwed. Gave up 170 yards or just something crazy to one dude.
Yeah. Yeah, in the first couple drives.
Yeah.
All rushing yards. Yeah.
Right. And I think that same back had less than 20 yards in the second half.
Yeah.
So, like, where is this defense in the first half, you know?
Yeah, and a lot of it, the Memphis play calling was more predictable in the second half because they had a decisive lead. Their play calls were a little bit more predictable for our defense. And so, I mean, give the defense credit. They did their job. I'm not exactly going to say they forced the mistakes for Memphis.
Right.
Memphis kind of made the mistakes themselves, but at least our defense was in the right spot. But you know, we lacked a little bit of talent, I think, up front.
Yeah, and size.
Yeah.
Definitely size.
Yeah, and size, and we still do, actually.
Yeah.
Our run defense is I still have some questions about it. Linebacker room, we're going to have a new look in the linebacker room this year. A little preview for y'all. Jace Ruder is switching from quarterback to linebacker.
Yeah, which that's a move he made last year, but tore his ACL, so he couldn't.
Right. So he's going at the very least, he'll be in the 2 deep. We'll see if he ends up becoming a starter.
And I mean, I like this move just really more for the mental aspects.
He's very smart. He's a very smart player. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how can you not be? Former quarterback, 7th year now.
Yeah, and I think he is going to be a quadruple major.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, he's been in college for a while now, but he's a husband and father.
Yeah.
So
and I mean, it's not like his kid's a newborn either. Like several years old at this point.
Well, I think it's about a year old.
Oh, okay. I can't do math.
No, it's all. Hey, we got a lot going on in our lives, y'all. So it's easier for us to lose track because we're trying to keep up with a ton of things. So we're setting the bar high for ourselves. So,
No cap.
No cap. I wish I could do the no cap thing right now. So let's go back to those breakthrough teams, right? So last year, right, last year in the new AAC, we saw Memphis and SMU break through once those top 3 previous teams left to go to the Big 12. So, speaking of the Big 12, Texas and Oklahoma leave.
Right.
So, when you look at the conference, we'll just talk last year. We'll look at a year-to-year thing here. Last year, obviously, Oklahoma State ended up playing for the Big 12 championship. They had one of the 2 most manageable schedules. Both the Oklahoma schools ended up with the 2 most manageable Big 12 schedules last year. I don't think Oklahoma State was all that great. If you were to look up the luck rankings, the luck metrics on teamrankings.com, Oklahoma State was top 5 in luck. So basically, they were not as good as what their record was.
Right.
Now, Oklahoma State, you know, the Big 12, every single team plays 9 conference games. Some teams are going to play 5 home, 4 away. Some teams are going to play 4 home, 5 away games. Oklahoma State's one of those teams that has to play 5 road games this year. I'm going to give you a team that finished in the top half of the Big 12 standings last year, that returns a lot of production, that wasn't lucky, that didn't max out, and they have, what's that phrase they use? They still got the juice.
Yes.
They still got the juice, and they play more home games than road games in conference play. The Iowa State Cyclones.
Yes.
So last year, right before the season started, there was like some off-the-field stuff, and as a result, I don't, again, know all what really took place. I think it had to do with like betting in the state of Iowa, like player props and all that, but they ended up starting a freshman quarterback, 0 experience. They had a freshman running back, not much experience. They had a pretty young team overall. And as a result, the season started very slow, especially offensively. The defense for Iowa State is normally pretty good, at least. And so they quickly took themselves off the map. But they quietly ended the regular season playing really good. They only had 2 losses in the back half of the season, a close loss to Kansas and a close loss to Texas. Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, didn't Texas almost end up playing for the national championship?
Yeah, and Kansas had a pretty good year too.
Right. And so now, you know, Iowa State lost the bowl game to Memphis, but I'm going to say this right now. I do not look at bowl games as like the indicator of like whether or not, like I don't look at that as my reason to discuss teams for better or for worse going into the next year. Bowl games compared to the regular season today with the transfer portal and opt-outs, it's completely apples to oranges.
Right.
So I don't look at the bowl game.
I mean, really outside of the playoffs.
Yeah, exactly. Outside the playoff. Yeah, it's not something I'm going to look at that much. So when you look at Iowa State's Big 12 schedule this year, 5 home games, 4 road games. One of those road games is against Houston.
Yeah.
Now, that's a game you should win, whether or not you play at home, neutral site, away. I don't care. You should win. Not saying that it's written in stone that they will. I'm not saying they've got a 99% chance of winning, but they should win.
Right.
And then their 3 other games away from home are against West Virginia and Morgantown. Tough environment. I don't think West Virginia is really all that great of a team. It's a winnable game.
Right. So the country roads might be taking Iowa State home with a win.
Potentially. There you go. We love the puns here. We're punny here as well. But it's a winnable game. I'm not saying they will win. It's winnable. Then they play Utah and Salt Lake City. Do we know what Cam Rising is going to look like by the time Iowa State plays them? By the way, Iowa State plays Utah in November. Is Cam Rising going to be his old self? Is he going to be 90+% healthy? I don't know. Then their other game away from home, and I say it away from home in that way because it's not technically a true road game. It's a neutral site game against Kansas because Kansas is not going to be playing any home games this year.
Wow.
They're going to be playing all of their home games in conference play at Arrowhead Stadium where the Kansas City Chiefs play. That's only about a 3.5-hour drive from Ames, Iowa. If you guys have noticed in the March Madness so far, Iowa State fans, they travel.
Yeah.
So Iowa State, that could be, yeah, they will have at least 35 to 40% of that stadium made up of Cyclone fans.
Oh, definitely.
So it's not going to be a de facto home game for the Jayhawks.
Right.
It's a winnable game. Speaking of quarterbacks who we don't know what to expect from, well, Jalen Daniels, the Kansas quarterback, is he going to be healthy? He has yet to play a full season in a KU uniform. So there's a lot of questions in the Big 12 this year. It's not going to be top-heavy. Utah has the most manageable schedule in the conference coming in. But what's Cam Rising going to be? I think Iowa State, and I talked about Rocco Beck, their quarterback. They got a really good receiving core. They always have good line of scrimmage play at Iowa State. The defense, they always get the most out of that defense. They return some of the most production in the country, and for their entire defense. They have a really good running back, by the way, too, who averaged over 7 yards a carry last year. I think this team could be one of your bigger surprise teams this fall.
Man.
So I went on a huge tangent there, but I'll let you take it away now with your next surprise team.
I mean, I would love to say OU is going to surprise everybody and shock the world. That's not going to happen. So, I mean, I'm thinking Ohio State is going to be a surprise team. They lost 2 straight games to Michigan, and, I mean, they lost a close game to Missouri as well in the Cotton Bowl. So, I mean, I like them to at least beat Michigan or win a bowl game. At least one of the above. Play a little bit better than, one might expect.
So Oklahoma's schedule this year is one of the most difficult in the entire country and one of the most difficult in the SEC. Florida probably has the most difficult schedule in the SEC and in the entire country. I would put Oklahoma probably second in terms of most difficult schedules in the SEC. They have to play at Auburn. They play Tennessee. They play a lot of the teams who won double-digit games last year. Like they play LSU and Alabama and Missouri. I mean, are you pulling out their schedule right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really difficult.
They have to play Missouri in Columbia.
Yeah. And they have to play LSU in Baton Rouge.
Yeah,
remember
last
that.
game of the year.
Yep.
And the week
So
before.
play Texas, by the way.
And the week before they play LSU, they've got to play Bama, which that game will be in Norman.
Yep.
But still.
I believe they play both Tennessee and Alabama in Norman.
Yes.
Okay. Trying to remember off the top of my head.
And at Auburn.
At Auburn, yeah.
That's not a tough. That is a tough win if you do pull it out.
Yeah, that'll be a tough game at Jordan-Hare Stadium, and that's the thing. Like, I think people overlook, like, if from an Oklahoma perspective, if you're just writing down the wins and losses, trying to predict Oklahoma's record, I think you would look at that Auburn game and say, it's Auburn, they should win that. I think people oftentimes overlook, though, how important it is the home field advantage for certain teams. And I think a lot of people just don't put into consideration, like, okay, if you have a scale of like 0 to 100, and let's say you're playing UMass, right? It doesn't matter where you're playing UMass. If you're Oklahoma, you're going to win.
Right.
If you're playing LSU, it probably matters where you play them. If you're playing LSU in Norman, you have a chance, right?
Right.
If you're playing LSU in Baton Rouge, it's probably a game. There's a slight chance, but you're probably chalking that up as a loss.
Yeah, regardless of how LSU's doing.
Right. And if they're playing Auburn, that's one of those. I mean, Oklahoma will be favored.
Right.
But because it's on the road, it's like that 65-35, 60-40 kind of game, favoring OU, but it's like there's a slight chance they could lose that game.
Right.
So when you play those kind of games, like the Auburns, like the Missouris of the world, when you play those kind of teams on the road, it makes the OUs of the world schedule that much more difficult. Because if you're Oklahoma, especially your first year in the SEC, you want Missouri, Auburn, Tennessee. You want those kind of teams at home. They get Tennessee at home. But I would rather take like LSU and Alabama on the road because you're probably not winning those games. Yeah. That's the way I look at it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And, I mean, I'm sure Bama's going to regress a little bit.
Right. So there's some questions with Bama, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, second to last game of the year, maybe Bama's figured everything out, but, I mean, OU is still going to have a tough game against Bama. So.
Yeah, and we discussed the difficulty of Oklahoma's conference schedule. Fortunately, their non-conference schedule, though, it's pretty manageable.
Oh, yeah. I think they play Maine.
I think they play Houston.
Yeah.
I think they play Houston. Maybe Tulane.
Yeah. Let me pull that back up again.
I know there's going to be someone out there that says, oh, but if they don't come ready to play, there's a 8% chance they could lose if this happens and that happens.
Yeah,
if you're scrutinizing like that, then I'm probably going to tune you out.
Right.
I'll just put it that way.
Yeah. They opened up the year at home against Temple, who UNT killed them.
Yeah, and Temple lost E.J. Warner, their quarterback, in the transfer portal. So Temple, I don't know if they're going to have a pulse this year.
Right. Then four straight home games to open up the year. Temple, August 31st. Houston, September 7th. Then the 14th, they play Tulane. Then open up conference play the 21st against Tennessee. It looks like they don't have a bye week until the first week of October.
Yep, right before they play Texas.
Horns down.
So what is your expectation for the Sooners this year?
Yeah, so my expectation, I'll start by giving you my ceiling. Ceiling, 8 to 10 wins, but expectation, 6 to 8.
Yeah, so the over-under for the Sooners is actually at 7.5. Yeah. I believe it's shaded to the under, if I'm not mistaken. But a win total at 7.5 for OU is like, I know a lot of people are going to be like, wow, like I'm taking the over on that.
Right.
I'd be careful on that. OU's got questions on the offensive line. They got Jackson Arnold coming in. He's got a lot of talent. Raw talent. We'll see how he performs this year. The receiving core, I don't think it's as good as most OU receiving cores, but it's still pretty good.
Oh yeah.
Last year they had major questions at receiver, and they ended up performing just fine. Of course, the defenses that they're playing this year will be much more difficult.
Right.
The biggest question I have for OU is two things: the physicality overall.
Yeah.
I saw them got pushed around sometimes against teams that they should not be getting pushed around. I thought they did a good job against Texas. I think that was kind of OU's Super Bowl last year.
Oh, definitely.
But I saw them against Kansas and Oklahoma State. They did not look like
mentally there.
Yeah, they didn't max out their potential in that game.
Right.
So, and now with questions on the offensive line, last year was an experienced O-line. Now it's inexperienced, and they're going to be playing the SEC gauntlet. With a young quarterback, I know Arnold's got a ton of talent, but we have to see it perform well behind a questionable offensive line.
Yeah.
So I've got my questions, and then the defense. I think with Brent Venables, in his third year now in Norman, I think it'll continue to get better.
Oh, definitely.
But they might have to do.
SEC.
Yeah, they're going to have to do better than just improve, in my opinion.
Right.
We'll see. I mean, I would not doubt Brent Venables with his defense one bit. I think they're going to be very aggressive. I think they got that Jacksonville State defensive coordinator who's has a very aggressive scheme.
Oh, yeah.
So I think OU's kind of a high variance team this year.
Right. I mean, I have the same questions just with their offense. And let's keep in mind, they have Seth Luttrell as their offensive coordinator. I hate that guy with a passion.
4th and 1.
With a passion.
So 3rd and shorts and 4th and shorts, I guess, especially like 4th and 1, 4th and 2. Are we going to see the Seth Luttrell special?
Oh, yeah. Just inside zone when it hadn't worked all game. Wasn't like my high school. Just terrible football.
All right,
and he's supposed to be an offensive guy. This dude played fullback. Obviously, he wants to run it up the middle.
So Oklahoma's going to have a 7-5 season?
Probably.
It's a really difficult schedule. Yeah, like I mentioned, they're a high variance team. I would not want to place a future on the Sooners this year, making a bet on their win total for sure. I would stay away from that one. But an interesting team to follow because I don't know what to expect from them this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll run the table on out-of-conference play.
I would agree with that. If they lose any of those non-conference games, they won't lose.
Fire Seth.
Well, there's going to be some upset people in Norman, and I'll tell you this: if they lose one of those 3 non-conference games that are somewhat losable, then it could be a long season because that schedule is not going to get any easier after that.
Oh, yeah.
So,
and they play Maine the first weekend of November, who, I mean, they're not going to be good. Probably. Or at least not to that level.
And a lot of the FCS teams, they don't have the size. You can talk about the talent, and they don't have as much talent, obviously, as FBS teams. But it's really more specifically the size difference on the line of scrimmage. Right. They've got some fast guys that transfer up from the FCS and the skill positions. But how often do you see an FCS lineman, offensive or defensive lineman, transfer up to the FBS, and they're immediately a starter and an impact player?
Right.
It's skill players occasionally.
Yeah, and even at the Group of 5 level, like you look at UNT, super small up front defensively.
Yeah.
And a couple years ago, whenever Cincinnati made the playoffs, they got bullied in the run game.
Exactly. They got bullied at the line of scrimmage. Alabama ran on their defense. They couldn't pass, though. Cincinnati's secondary was like glue that year. But they ran on Cincinnati, and Cincinnati's offensive line could not block Bama one bit.
Right. Eric Morris saw that defensive scheme and was like, I need that.
So, do you have any other breakthrough teams?
Yeah, I think that was it for me.
Okay, I've got one other team. I don't think they're going to have the kind of season that I don't think they have the ceiling that teams like Virginia Tech, Texas State, and Iowa State do. However, I like the path. I like their schedule this year. And I like what they did in the transfer portal. And I know the people that are listening are like, just tell me who the team is already. You're not going to believe
Bama.
it.
No.
Yeah, you're not going to believe who I'm actually going to be discussing here. Okay, I'll try to I'll make it even more enticing, okay? Okay, so this team has a first-year coach. This first-year coach coached in the Sun Belt last year.
Sun Belt, Fun Belt, baby.
Yep. Yeah, and he was having some fun. His team last year, they won double-digit games and arguably had the best season in their program's history. Who is this that I'm talking about? Kurt Cignetti, James Madison's head coach last year. And now he's going up to he's going up to Bloomington, Indiana.
Oh, the Hoosiers.
The Hoosiers. Indiana, they had a really good team a few years ago before. I'm going blank. Who was Washington's quarterback this past year?
Penix.
Thank you, Michael Penix. The Penix Energy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Stole my pun.
Yeah. So, big Penix Energy. I love how Howard actually did that. Desmond Howard on game day. He's got that big Penix Energy.
Said it like 5 times.
Oh, I know. It's great.
Like Matthew Freely with his catchphrase, which we're not going to say on this podcast.
Right. But, Matthew, if you're listening to this, we appreciate you a lot, man.
Yes. What a guy. What a legend.
Oh, absolutely. And Curt Cignetti is also a legend, the first-year coach for Indiana. He has had a winning season every single year as a head coach, whether it's been FCS level or FBS. He was at James Madison for a few years when they transferred from the FCS to the FBS level a couple years ago. Their first year in the Sun Belt, they had a really good team. We're just on the outside looking into the conference championship. They would not have been eligible to play, but power rating-wise, they were one of the top teams in the Fun Belt.
Right.
And then this past year, they were one of the top teams in the entire G5.
Yeah.
And I believe there was a point in the season they were ranked for a short time.
Yeah.
It was their first AP ranking in school history. I remember that.
Yeah.
So
and almost didn't get to play in the bowl game. But
yeah, and they ended up playing Air Force.
Speaking of that game, so
did you go to it?
I did not. But the night before, me and my family were in the stockyards, and the bowl game they played, the Armed Forces Bowl, is at TCU, and they were holding this pep rally in the stockyards, and I think we passed by some of their assistant coaches. One of the dudes was, how whenever you break your ankle, sometimes you get one of those scooters or whatever.
Yeah.
This dude was hammered.
Really?
And just
running into light poles on the scooter.
Just about.
Yeah.
But it looked like a lot of fun, which that's why they lost. They were having too much fun before the game.
Yeah, it was their first bowl game appearance in school history.
Yeah.
At the FBS level, and I guess sometimes people do not act like they've done it before because they have not done it before.
Exactly.
And that's another thing about bowl games. Some teams are just there because they're just there to have fun. They're just kind of enjoying the moment and to each their own. Fun. Yeah, to each their own. But there's just more factors with bowl season now, so I don't really weigh in the bowl factor heavily. Again, I know I mentioned that earlier in the show. Curt Cignetti goes to Indiana. He brings in a lot of his players from James Madison. Now, I am not suggesting, Indiana's going to play for the Big Ten championship. These JMU transfers are going to show the Big Ten who's the toughest out there. These G5 players are going to be tougher than the Ohio State players. No, I'm not saying that. Let's take things with a grain of salt here. Indiana's bar and expectation is much lower than Virginia Tech's and Iowa State's and Texas State's. We're talking about a team with a preseason win total here of 5.5. Yeah. So it's do you think they're going to make a bowl game, maybe finish with 7 or wins or so? Or do you think they're going to maybe go 3-9 or 4-8 or maybe just miss out on a bowl game, finish 5-7? Right. I think this team is going to start off the season real hot. I think this is one of those teams where they start 5-1 or something like that. And everyone's talking about them where is this team coming from? Wow, look at Indiana. And then they kind of fade in the second half of the season, but they get to a bowl game. So actually, I know I don't know if we're going to end up doing a podcast on this, but betting advice, it's plus money to the over, meaning it's at really good value. I would actually take it on Indiana at 5.5. They have 8 home games, Indiana does. You heard me correct, 8 home games. They've got 3 home games in the non-con, and then, Big Ten teams play 9 conference games as well. Right. They get 5 home games and then 4 conference road games. Yeah. And so, but all 3 non-con games are at home too. They should win all 3 there, which means they only have to win 3 Big Ten games, go 3-6 in conference play. I mentioned they did a really good job in the transfer portal. They bring in a guy at quarterback named Curtis Rourke. He's from Ohio. JMU's quarterback went to Texas State, right? Curtis Rourke, he's a really good college player. And then they brought in, I forgot his first name. His last name is Surratt from James Madison.
Chaz or Chase?
Something like that.
One of the above.
Yeah. I do have the graphic saved, so I'll look it up while I'm talking here. Yeah. But Surratt there was just a graphic a few days ago discussing top 25 receivers. Here, I got it right here.
He's got to be one of them.
Elijah Surratt.
Elijah, yes.
Elijah Surratt.
I think I was thinking of the dude from North Carolina.
Yeah. I know who you're talking about, yeah. But Elijah Surratt is going to be one of the top receivers in at least the Big Ten. Yeah. And they also did a really good job. Indiana, with the entire receiving core in the portal, they brought in, including Surratt, 4 receivers with over 1,000 receiving yards in their respective careers. Wow. So this team for Indiana, yes, it's Kurt Cignetti in his first year. People are going to be like, it's Indiana. It's a rebuild. Right. It's a rebuilding year. I don't think it is. Maybe next year will be. I think they did a good enough job in the portal to plug and play with a lot of seniors they brought in offensively and defensively. They brought in, remember how good James Madison's defensive line was last year? They brought in a couple of those dudes. The linebackers, they brought in a couple of those dudes. There was a couple of really good defensive backs for Old Dominion, who they brought in through the portal. They're seniors. This is actually a senior-laden team.
Yeah.
And all I'm saying is that, hey, I think they're going to hit the over of 5.5, and I think they could get off to a fast start. I like the way their schedule works out for them. Again, 8 home games. And of their 4 true road games, I shouldn't even say true, because one of their 4 games away from home is against Northwestern. Northwestern, they're not going to be playing any true home games this year.
Wow.
Because their Northwestern Stadium is going through some renovation. And then UCLA is another road game for them early in the season for Indiana. UCLA's fans never even show up.
Right.
And then the other 2 home games, are Ohio State. They're not winning that. Right. And then Michigan State, who knows what to expect out of the Spartans this year. Yeah. It's going to be a tough environment, though, in East Lansing. That's their schedule.
Yeah.
And they play teams like Nebraska and Washington, who's in a complete rebuild this year. Yeah. They get all those teams, Purdue at home, Maryland at home, Nebraska, Washington at home, the 3 non-con games at home that are all winnable.
And if you look at those non-con games, it's FIU, Western Illinois,
and Charlotte. Yeah, they're going to be 3-0 in the non-con.
Definitely.
If Curtis Rourke, he does need to stay healthy because they don't have much depth at quarterback. But if he stays healthy, I think Indiana is not only going to hit the over, I think this team is going to finish with a winning regular season record in Kurt Cignetti's first year, and again, get off to a really fast start. Watch out for the Hoosiers this year. Again, take it with a grain of salt. I'm not saying, 10-2 New Year's 6 appearance. But
they're definitely going to the playoffs.
Yeah. We got to keep in mind that with the at-large spots, they're going to throw in some SEC and Big Ten teams. I don't think Indiana's getting that, obviously. But I don't see them missing out on a bowl game.
Oh, definitely.
And Indiana hasn't won a bowl game in a long time.
Yeah.
So watch out for the Hoosiers this year.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think that's all I had.
That's all I have. I mean, maybe we'll have other podcast episodes with like hot takes and all that. But that's it for breakthrough teams. Of course, I did throw in some hot takes in here as well. But.
Oh yeah, very spicy, very hot. You know what else is hot? The sun.
The sun is hot. Yeah, the sun is very, very hot.
Indeed. Well, thank you all for tuning in to the O Day and Night podcast. Thank you to the Encyclopedia, Mr. Connor Hibbett, for joining me.
And thank you for having me on again.
Sir. And we'll see y'all in my next episode.